Empire. As a form of government, it has shaped our lives for millennia. The Roman Empire, the Mongol Empire, the British Empire. All have dominated lands and people, but none were the first. In the 24th century BCE, Mesopotamia was made up of many different city-states, each with their own king and patron god. It was largely inhabited by two distinct ethnic groups, the Sumerians in the south and the Semitic Akkadian people in the north. In 2334 BCE, the Akkadians conquered the Sumerian lands, uniting the city-state kingdoms here to create an entirely new form of political organization: empire.
This is the first time that you had a multicultural, multilingual group of city-states all unified together under one banner. This represents a tectonic shift in government. This is a new state of political organization that we've never seen before.
The Akkadian Empire was the world's first empire and ruled from the Persian Gulf in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, all the way north into modern-day Turkey.
We see this empire coming seemingly from nowhere, and suddenly the Akkadian language rises up to then become the language across this entire region.
Under the Akkadians, life in Mesopotamia flourished. They used their power and geographical reach to create a period of great prosperity inside the empire.
Their trade routes spanned vast distances outside of the empires. They were actually trading with people in India, with people in the Mediterranean. You had beautiful artistry pouring into the empire. Pearls, ivory, both elephant and hippopotamus. Even live animals like monkeys. Everything that you could possibly imagine was all coming in, making the empire wealthier and more opulent.
But after only 140 years, by 2193 BCE, the Akkadian Empire fractured. Entire regions were abandoned as the empire descended into chaos. The Akkadian Empire's very existence was forgotten through the passage of time. What could cause the world's first empire to be erased from history? The Akkadian Empire wouldn't resurface until a British archaeologist made an unrelated discovery. On the east bank of the Tigris River, Sir Austin Henry Layard uncovers something incredible: the king's palace of the biblical city of Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, a people who rose to power over 1,000 years after the disappearance of the Akkadians. Layard excavates for years, but it's in the last days of the dig that he makes his greatest discovery. Layard's workers had uncovered a chamber containing 30,000 pieces of clay tablets, all marked with cuneiform script, the ancient writing system of the Assyrians.
What Layard had stumbled across were the remains of the greatest library ever known in the ancient world, the library of Ashurbanipal, the king of the Assyrians. What secrets might these tablets hold?
For the 19th century archaeologists, these cuneiform texts could hold an untold wealth of information about the history of ancient Mesopotamia. The problem is, no one can read them. They're written in an indecipherable form of cuneiform script. To have any hope of unlocking the secrets of the ancient Middle East, they need to crack the cuneiform code. For the past 15 years, British archaeologist Sir Henry Rawlinson has been working on translating cuneiform.
Cuneiform isn't actually a language, it's a writing system. A bit like in modern times, the Latin alphabet can be used to write English, French, Spanish, and German. Cuneiform systems could be used to write all manner of ancient languages.
Rawlinson was obsessed with understanding how the ancient cuneiform system of writing worked.
Henry Rawlinson was a British army officer, and he was sent on a posting to an area in what is now modern-day Iran. And he saw this huge mountain, Mount Behistun, which was along the ancient Silk Road. And he saw about halfway up the cliff, there was an ancient inscription. He can tell that it's written in cuneiform script, and he also realizes that the script isn't all one language. It appears to be 3 different languages, all written in cuneiform. He identifies one of them, Old Persian, but what on earth are the other 2?
Rawlinson had already translated the Old Persian cuneiform inscription, but the other languages still remained a mystery. When he was shown Layard's discovery, he immediately saw that the cuneiform script on these tablets was the same as one of the unknown languages written in cuneiform found on the Behistun carving.
If they could work out what this mystery language in the Behistun inscription said, they could use that as a launch pad to start decoding what the clay tablets from the library said.
Understanding this language could be key to unlocking the secrets of ancient Mesopotamia. He returned to the Behistun inscription. It was assumed that the 3 languages, all inscribed using the cuneiform writing system, said the same thing. Was the answer hidden here?
Rawlinson already understood the Old Persian inscription, and if he could use that by decoding the repetitive symbols and working out what some of the words might mean, he might be able to decode the other 2 mystery languages.
If Rawlinson could find similarities between Old Persian cuneiform and the unknown cuneiform language, he could build an alphabet for deciphering the Library of Nineveh.
Old Persian uses about 43 different symbols, and he realized that each of them corresponded to a letter or a number. However, the other 2 languages appear to have many, many more symbols.
But this gives Rawlinson a clue. There are too many cuneiform symbols for each one to represent an individual letter. Instead, the language must be syllabic, where each symbol represents a syllable.
Rawlinson began trial and error, trying to relate symbols in the unknown cuneiform language with the symbols that he did understand in the Old Persian. And you go, well, if this means king or god in Old Persian, maybe that's what this means in the mystery language. Does that work? And you try it out.
It takes almost 10 years, but Rawlinson cracks the code. He can finally read the tablets from the Library of Nineveh.
And what riches it held. There were texts on medicine, there were texts on astrology, and there was a huge section on history. It was extraordinary. The scribes had not just written a history of their own people, the Assyrians, they'd written about the people who'd come before them. There was an empire that we never knew had existed, that had been declared the greatest of all time.
Here, Rawlinson found references to the world's first empire, an empire that ruled over all of Mesopotamia. Rawlinson christens them the Acadians.
The archaeologists were dumbfounded. Who were these people? How come we'd never heard of them? How could a whole civilization be destroyed in such a way that they would be entirely lost to the sands of time?
When did the Acadians exist? When were they wiped out? And what caused their destruction? Rawlinson spends years translating cuneiform tablet after cuneiform tablet, looking for any clues. But in 1867, nearly 10 years after Rawlinson first deciphered Akkadian cuneiform, he came across a tablet. It was the legend of Sargon of Akkad, the first king of the Akkadian Empire. Rawlinson had uncovered the first part of the Akkadians' history. In 2334 BCE, Sargon came to power as the king of Kish, a city-state in the Akkadian region of Mesopotamia. From the very beginning, Akkadian history is steeped in violence and conflict. Sargon fought war after war, expanding his kingdom across Mesopotamia, conquering and subjugating Sumerian and Akkadian city-states alike to form the Akkadian Empire, the world's first empire. To fund the administration of this new empire, Sargon demanded each city-state pay their share in taxes.
Taxes are the price you pay for a civilized society. So what Sargon did was he required every individual to produce X amount of grain and bring it to an administrative center. These administrative centers were basically grain storage facilities.
And Sargon needed a lot of grain, particularly to fund an innovation of his, the world's first standing army. Full-time, well-equipped, professional soldiers, always ready to fight.
In the past, if they needed to go to war, if they needed to fight, they would bring in a conscripted army. You've got soldiers who might be farmers, they might be herders. They are not professional fighters. They're not necessarily all that good at it. But by the time you move over to this full-time army, you've got people who know how to kill.
But it's under the rule of the Akkadian king Naram Sin in 2254 BCE that the empire reached its true height. Naram Sin poured huge amounts of wealth into Akkadian construction projects, glorifying their temples and cities.
If you'd gone to one of these cities, your mind would have been blown. Gold statues, you'd have seen copper statues, all shining brightly.
Through conquest, Naram Sin controlled lands from the Persian Gulf in the east, bordering the Elamite kingdom in modern-day Iran, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, and northwards into modern-day Turkey. Lands that bordered the territory of nomadic mountain tribes, known as the Gutians. Naram Sin crowned himself the king of the Four Quarters. He ruled all the land known to the Akkadians. But even this wasn't enough.
Naram Sin makes himself a god. I mean, talk about the ego of the man. There are engravings of him where he's wearing this horned helmet that only the gods wear, and he's about twice the size of his soldiers. He's so important, he is a living god.
The Akkadian Empire achieved something truly astonishing. So why had archaeologists never heard about them until now? What could have caused the world's first empire to disappear? There must be some clue behind why the Akkadians were erased from history. As they dig deeper into the cuneiform tablets, they uncover a disturbing legend, the Curse of Akkad.
The story goes that Naram Sin attacks the city of Nippur and he destroys their temple. He commits this act of great sacrilege, and as a result of that action, he becomes cursed.
The gods were so appalled by Naram Sin's actions that they prayed for his empire's destruction.
A snippet from the Curse of Akkad reads, "May the grass grow long in your canal-bank towpaths, built up with canal sediment. In your plains, where fine grass grows, may the reed of lamentation grow. Akkad, may brackish water flow where fresh water once flowed for you."
Because of Naram Sin's hubris, the gods destroyed the Akkadian Empire. Did the empire experience a large-scale collapse? archaeologists need to know when the Akkadian Empire actually existed and when they were killed off. Archaeologist and philanthropist Herbert Weld Blundell donates his collection of Middle Eastern artifacts and antiquities to Oxford University's Ashmolean Museum. For the curators, one of the items is of particular interest: a small prism covered in cuneiform inscriptions. It's a copy of the Sumerian king list.
The Sumerian king list was written around 1800 BC in the Sumerian language. It lists the kings and the cities they ruled over. It also tells us the length of each king's reign. The Akkadians, they're mentioned on the king list. If you can work out when one king ruled, you can work out when all the other kings ruled too. So, if using the Sumerian king list we can get a date, then we can date the Akkadians. We will know for the first time in modern history when the Akkadians existed.
But without a point of reference, a year to match it to, this information was useless. They look again to the Library of Nineveh. Here were the ancient recordings of solar eclipses.
Scholars realised that if they could find a solar eclipse recorded by astronomers using a calendar that we already understood, they could use that to sync up the calendars used in the Sumerian king list.
And they found one. An eclipse recorded by the ancient Greeks on the 15th of June 763 BCE. The rise of the Akkadian Empire could finally be dated.
We know that Sargon the Great began ruling in 2334 BC. But after the year 2193, the Sumerian king lists start to record what appears to be a chaotic breakdown of the Akkadian Empire. They have this phrase that repeats who was king, who was not king. Kings reigned for merely a year or 2 years at most. It suggests that there was unrest, that there was chaos, that there was confusion, and perhaps an empire that was in the midst of fracturing. The Sumerian king list hints that this great empire was imploding, but it doesn't tell us why.
Archaeologists have a year for the collapse, a time of death for the Akkadian Empire, but they're still no closer to knowing why the Akkadians died out. What could have triggered the sudden collapse of the world's first empire? They turn their attention to how the Akkadians managed to survive and thrive in the harsh climate of the Middle East. Maybe this would offer a clue. The Akkadians weren't the first civilization to emerge in Mesopotamia. Over 5,000 years ago, in 3100 BCE, the first great Sumerian cities sprung from the desert. It's these separate city-states that the Akkadians conquered and unified to create the world's first empire. These Sumerians were among the first people to use the wheel, the plow, brew beer, and develop the world's first writing system, early forms of cuneiform script. The Sumerians achieved all of this because they mastered farming. The surplus in food that farming gave allowed them to go from nomadic hunter-gatherers to living in settlements, to then vast cities. And two natural features of Mesopotamia were essential for allowing the world's first civilization to flourish.
Mesopotamia is a beautiful Greek word, and it means between the rivers. So it can be broken down into meso, which is between, and potamoi, which is rivers. And the two rivers that this word refers to are the Tigris and the Euphrates. Rivers, particularly in ancient times, were the givers of life.
At the time of the Akkadian Empire, the climate of Mesopotamia was similar to today's. Vast desert plains with pockets of fertile land, straddling the banks of these two rivers. In a land where rainfall was scarce, the Sumerians found a way to use these rivers to turn a desert into an agricultural powerhouse by building vast irrigation canals. When the Akkadians captured and took control of the Sumerian lands, they knew just how important this irrigation network was for their survival, but also for their plans of expansion. They installed a complex bureaucratic system to manage the flow of water.
The entire system of ancient Mesopotamia, of Accadia, rested on the health of these irrigation canals. To be able to produce as much wheat as they did using irrigation, they had to constantly maintain this really complex network of irrigation canals. One of the greatest contributions that the Akkadians have given us is bureaucracy, is administration. To maintain these irrigation canals, you had to have a strong centralized government looking over the administration of these. The problem with the Akkadians is that as they get bigger, they all seem to become victims of their own success. As the empire is expanding, there's constantly need for more food. There's constantly more mouths to feed.
With more and more pressure placed on Akkadian farming, how did they manage to feed an entire empire? Archaeologists turn to their records. Here they find evidence of Akkadian expansion into the Habor Plains in what is now northeastern Syria.
As you move into northern Mesopotamia, the landscape actually changes fairly radically from arid desert to plains. What we see is, unlike the south, where there was irrigation, we find that here farming is actually primarily rain-fed.
Rain-fed agriculture relies solely on rainfall to water crops. It isn't as efficient as irrigation farming, but on the Habor Plains, the Akkadians found a way to feed their empire. Grain production here became crucial for feeding their standing army. And Akkadian history is steeped in conflict. The north would be an ideal target for an enemy of theirs, and they had many. Archaeologists look to the north for any evidence of the Akkadian Empire's collapse. Renowned British archaeologist Max Mallowan excavates at the ruins of Tel Brak. It's a huge 7,000-year-old settlement on the dry farming Habor Plains. Surely, such a large site must hold Akkadian remains. The problem is where to begin digging. So Mallowan turns to a cutting-edge piece of technology: aerial photography. In the 1920s, this area was extensively photographed from the air. This gives Mallowan a bird's-eye view of Tel Brak and allows him to identify much more clearly any human-made features. When Mallowan broke ground, the aerial surveys paid dividends.
What he finds is walls, and not just walls to anything. He realises very soon that this is a palace with a grain store attached, and it's also a fortress.
But this isn't all Mallowan finds.
On the bricks is the stamp of the king, Nahram Sin. So this means that this was built at the height of the empire, but this palace, this great grain store, this fortress is unfinished. They've stopped building it halfway through.
What could make the Akkadians abandon the construction of a fort at such a strategically important site? Archaeologists need to know if this area is linked to the collapse. In the decades since, more and more Akkadian sites are uncovered across the Habor Plains. Archaeologists are shocked by what they find. Site after site was abandoned by the Akkadians. At Tel Leilan, archaeologists have uncovered unused clay balls for pressing cuneiform tablets, left in situ on the floor of the Akkadian administrative building.
Why would people leave useful artifacts? In addition, what's visible at the site is the foundations of a new building, but it hasn't been completed.
Archaeologists even find unused bricks sat next to the unfinished building. It's evidence the site was rapidly abandoned. Why would the Akkadians abandon such an important region? Was this evidence they were under attack?
If you're going to conquer an ancient empire, you have to first take out their ability to feed themselves. In a vast empire, one of the things that you can do is start taking out their grain production cities.
Could this explain how the Akkadians disappeared from history? Were they wiped out? Archaeologists need to work out if there is any evidence of war. Marie-Agnès Coty is a geologist and a specialist in soil analysis. In 1990, she was brought in to examine sites across the Harbour Plains.
Je voyais bien quelque chose de noir qui ressemble à du noir de fumée sur des surfaces que je pouvais suivre à la fouille.
Coty had found evidence of large-scale burning. Was Tel Brak destroyed by conflict? It would explain the discarded clay balls and unfinished construction project. If the fortress was under attack, the inhabitants may have been forced to flee and the site abandoned. Luckily, the cuneiform records provide a lot of evidence for the Akkadians at war.
Not everybody wants to be a part of the Akkadian Empire. There are constant rebellions. There's constant unrest that has to be dealt with.
And in the east were the Gutians, nomadic mountain warriors continuously attacking the edges of the empire. But the Akkadians were very good at fighting.
The Akkadians were able to be so powerful because they had a standing army. The other thing that the Akkadians were able to do was to make incredible use of the bow and arrow. You didn't have to touch your opponent. And by the time you actually engage them hand-to-hand in combat, you've already won the war.
The Akkadians could hold their own, and closer analysis of the burned soil layer reveals something unusual.
Il n'y avait pas de traces de feu. Donc vous trouvez un dépôt noir qui a toutes les caractéristiques de dépôt de fumée, mais qui en théorie, ou en théorie dans les situations, je dirais, normales, est associé quelque part à des structures de combustion, et là, il n'y en avait pas. J'ai donc identifié dans ce niveau noir la présence de composés indiquant une vaporisation à très haute température, non seulement à très haute température, mais extrêmement rapide, que l'on appelle un phénomène de flash thermique. On ne sait les faire que expérimentalement en laboratoire. Donc là, il y a 4000 ans, de toute évidence, l'homme n'était pas capable de faire ça.
The burn layer couldn't have been caused by invaders, and a closer analysis of the soil reveals something else unusual to Coty. Tel Brak was hit from above, pummeled with debris coming straight down.
C'est donc une chute de débris que j'appelle exotique. Ça ne pouvait venir que par la haute altitude.
Coty needed to know what could cause this kind of destruction during the 3rd millennium BCE. Was it linked to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire? She expanded her analysis to other Akkadian sites on the Harbour Plains. Was the same pattern of destruction found across the region? It might help explain the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. In 1991, Coty looked 50 kilometers northeast of Tel Brak to Tel Leilan. Here, she made a startling discovery. The same flash thermal phenomenon, burn layer. And above this, something else unusual, dust, lots of it.
La couche de poussière de Tel Leilan, il pouvait avoir quelques dizaines de centimètres d'épaisseur, voire plus, en fonction des contextes, en fonction de combien, en fait, de combien de matériaux s'étaient accumulés dans des bas-fonds, dans des petites dépressions. Là, ça pouvait être jusqu'à 1 mètre d'épaisseur.
Analysis showed a thin layer of coarse debris and then a large layer of fine dust. For Coty, it indicates the surface was hit with coarse debris, the impact through the local soil into the air to then settle as a layer of dust. Something pushed this coarse debris down onto Tel Leilan with an incredible force. But these aren't the only unexplained clues Corti found. Buried amongst the debris at each site were small pieces of plastic.
On nous dit que l'Anthropocène est défini, la période actuelle est définie par l'arrivée des microplastiques et des microplastiques. Je croyais, comme tout le monde, que c'était de la contamination parce que d'autres collègues en avaient trouvé. Pour moi, c'était du matériel industriel. Je ne comprenais pas ce qu'ils faisaient dans ces surfaces archéologiques, il n'y avait pas de raison que je m'y intéresse.
Corti began to look outside the Harbour Plains to see if there were any other archaeological sites that showed similar signatures. 300 kilometers from Tel Leilan is the palace ruin of Tel Amarna. Here, archaeologists have uncovered something incredible.
J'ai pu constater le palais de l'Empire d'Akkad effondré intact. La structure qui a été totalement déstabilisée, qui est tombée intacte, ont resté sans voix devant cet enregistrement.
Decades of analysis indicate to Corti that the destruction was caused by a shockwave. The evidence points to a great explosive force that devastated sites across northern Mesopotamia. But Corti has no idea what it is. Could it explain why these Akkadian sites were abandoned?
Je pense que quand on fait une découverte de ce type-là, on ne sait pas que ça va changer le cours de votre vie, mais on ne peut pas lâcher prise. C'est un petit peu, je ferai la comparaison, c'est un peu comme si un détective est sur les traces d'un tueur en série, d'un serial killer, il ne va pas lâcher prise.
In Perpignan, France, at the French National Centre for Scientific Research, Corti and a team of physicists analysed the destruction pattern. Because the debris impacted the sites from above, they looked to the sky for natural phenomena. But what could deliver such a rapid blast of high-intensity heat? Corti gets a clue. An accident report from emergency services who have been investigating the death of someone struck by lightning. Incredibly, at the accident scene, the emergency workers uncovered a familiar material. The same plastic polymers Corti found across the Harbour Plains.
Et là, je dis, oulala, mais ça, c'est pas de la contamination, ça va pas du tout, parce qu'il a absolument pas les caractéristiques d'un plastique industriel.
Industrial plastic is formed by combining and processing the byproducts of crude oil. It has a unique molecular structure. But the plastic polymers recorded at the accident scene are different.
Nous avons pu procéder en fait à une identification sur les effets de la victime, des traces de foudre, et constater qu'effectivement, il y avait eu transformation de la peau, transformation des effets en polymère. Nous avions affaire à des phénomènes plasma. Donc les phénomènes de foudre déclenchent des plasmas électriques qui transforment en fait les aérosols en nanoparticules. Et pourquoi ces nanoparticules sont si importantes? Et c'est ces mêmes oxydes de titane en nanofeuillets que j'avais identifiés dans la matrice polymère des plastiques de Tel Leilan. Je pourrais vous faire une liste de tous les sites.
The plastic polymers found on the body of the person struck by lightning were the same as the ones Corti found in the Akkadian archaeological excavations. Her analysis has shown that the plastic she uncovered wasn't pollution after all, but a naturally occurring plastic polymer created by lightning. Corti has a hunch that lightning was responsible for the destruction of the Akkadian sites across the Harbour Plains. But how could such a large lightning storm actually form? After decades of analysis, Corti has developed a theory that she believes explains it: a dust bomb. It requires a massive injection of dust high into the atmosphere, likely from a volcanic eruption. As this large amount of dust moves between the troposphere and the stratosphere, it creates friction, and the air becomes charged with static electricity. The electric field becomes so great that it rips atoms apart, and creates plasma channels. When these channels connect, they allow the electricity to flow and lightning is formed. As this huge amount of dust falls to Earth, it generates an incredibly powerful but localized lightning storm. When it touches down, the energy release is massive.
Donc quand on a affaire à des phénomènes de foudre, on est à de l'hypervitesse, c'est de l'hypervélocité. On est à plusieurs Mach, on est à Mach 10, donc on est à des vitesses hypersoniques. Il y en a qui ont comparé ces manifestations aux effets des bombes atomiques. On est sur une déflagration hyper ponctuelle. La puissance de l'énergie est concentrée dans ce canal de foudre et avec une concentration extrêmement importante. C'est l'armare qui a été totalement déstabilisé, qui est tombé intact. Et en fait, ça se fait en quelques microsecondes. Donc ça a dû être quelque chose de remarquable.
The heightened dust needed for the phenomenon to occur could explain the thick dust layer found at Tel Leilan. Corty's analysis shows it was deposited over only a number of days. It would also explain the soot layer found across the region, intense heat caused by lightning. But it's proved impossible for Corty to date the destruction layers across each site, for certain, to the Akkadian period. And without a date range connecting the sites, there's no way of linking Corty's theory to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. But it was clear that a large amount of dust accumulated at Tel Leilan. What else could cause this level of dust? And could it be possible to date it to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire? Dr. Frank Sirocco is an ocean floor sediment specialist. He is approached by archaeologists investigating the sudden end of the Akkadian Empire.
Ja, der Meeresboden ist in weiten Bereichen wirklich perfekt, um den Staub aufzuzeichnen, weil nichts anderes dort zur Ablagerung kommt, zumindest nichts anderes, was vom Land kommt. Da kommen diese Winde aus der Wüste, die Schamalwinde, und bringen dann ihre Staubfracht über den Ozean. Und von dort aus fallen sie dann aus, ins Wasser rein, und dann setzen sie sich in dem Wasser ab.
The dust particles sink down through the water and build up in layers on the ocean floor. Sirocco suggested they look at samples taken from the Gulf of Oman. If there was a dust event in Mesopotamia, it would show up here. Crucially, they might be able to date it to the Akkadian period. Dr. Sirocco analyzed the sample looking specifically for dolomite, the mineral signature for dust found in Mesopotamia.
Meistens lagen die Konzentrationen vom Dolomit so etwa bei vielleicht 5%. Und dann haben wir in diesem Kern aus dem Golf von Oman plötzlich Gehalte gefunden, die gingen hoch auf 10–20% in der Größenordnung. Und da ist uns eigentlich zum ersten Mal klar geworden, dass es so einen sehr starken Staubsturm gegeben haben muss, 2200 vor Christus nach unseren damaligen Datierungen. Und das war eigentlich das stärkste Signal, was wir im Staub überhaupt gefunden haben in den letzten 10.000 Jahren.
Incredibly, the increase in dust lasted for 300 years. Corty believes her dust bomb event occurred in the space of a few days. But Sirocco's dusty period is much longer. What could cause such a lengthy spike in the sediment core history?
Eigentlich kann nur ein solches Ereignis über längere Zeit wirklich dieses Signal in den marinen Sedimenten verursachen. Es ist eigentlich schon sehr eindeutig, dass das eine Dürre gewesen sein muss.
A 300-year-long drought could certainly account for the collapse of the Akkadian Empire.
As soon as drought takes away that agricultural base, as soon as you have too many hungry mouths to feed, your empire crumbles.
And it seems they weren't the only civilization to experience upheaval at this point in history. From the Egyptian Old Kingdom, across the region to the Indus Valley civilization in modern-day Pakistan, civilizations collapsed and entire cities were abandoned. A severe region-wide drought was beginning to make sense. But did the Akkadians leave any evidence to back up the theory? Archaeologists turn again to the Sumerian king list.
After the year 2193, the Sumerian king list holds this very ominous phrase, who was king, who was not king, which suggests a huge depth of confusion, perhaps chaos. Rulers were on the throne for just a short period of time. The dust spike in the sediment samples taken from the Gulf of Oman show a spike around 2200 BC, which tallies perfectly with this chaotic breakdown described by the Sumerian kings list.
Drought is looking more and more likely the cause for the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. But there's an issue with Dr. Sirocco's Oman results. These ocean core samples can't be analysed at a high enough resolution for dating to be done exactly. There's an inbuilt error range of 300 years. The drought could miss the rise and fall of the Akkadian Empire entirely. Without an accurate date, it's impossible to prove that drought coincided with the collapse of the world's first empire. But then, a stroke of fortune. In 2018, Oxford University's Paleoclimate Research Laboratory collected samples of stalagmites from caves just outside Tehran in Iran. The lab studies geology around the world and what it can tell us about ancient climate.
Stalagmites are really good climate proxies. That means they tell us something about the climate of which they're growing.
As the researchers analysed the sediment deposit history of the stalagmite samples, they came across something unexpected.
There's a spike in dust around 2200 years BC that lasts for about 300 years. Where is that dust coming from? Well, if you look at the paleoenvironmental analysis, the main area that dust is travelling from is from Mesopotamia.
And because the tests were done at a high resolution, it's possible to date the dusty period accurately. It matches the Oman samples perfectly.
What this is showing is likely drought in that region.
But what caused this drought in the first place? A phenomenon being studied as a strong cause for drought across the world is El Niño. Could it be responsible for a drought occurring at 2200 BCE? El Niño occurs when tropical water in the eastern Pacific Ocean becomes unusually warm. The effects of El Niño are unpredictable, but often cause drought around the globe. Dr. Frank Sirocco has a hunch El Niño is responsible for the drought at 2200 BCE. But how can you work out when El Niño occurred throughout history? Sirocco turns to what we know now.
Man weiß sehr genau heute, dass ein El Niño-Ereignis dazu führt, dass wir vor Peru sehr warmes Wasser haben, wo sonst die Oberflächentemperatur sehr, sehr kühl ist. Und dieses warme Wasser hinterlässt Spuren in dem Plankton, was vor Peru dann sich auf den Meeresboden absetzt. Und das können wir wieder in einem Sedimentkern analysieren und dann eben halt genau sagen, wann hatten wir Phasen mit warmem Wasser vor Peru und wann hatten wir Phasen mit kaltem Wasser.
When they date the sample, incredibly, they see a spike in sediment from 2500 to 2000 BCE. For Sirocco, it indicates an intensification of El Niño activity around the period the drought hit Mesopotamia.
Man kann sicherlich keinen direkten Beweis führen, dass Veränderungen im El Niño 2200 vor Christus hundertprozentig die mesopotamische Dürre verursacht haben. Das Einzige, was wir wirklich sehen können aus Sedimentkernen, die wir vor Peru gewonnen haben, dass genau in dieser Zeit, so zwischen 2500 und 2000, das El Niño-System ganz grundlegende Veränderungen erfahren hat. Und von daher ist es einfach aufgrund des Verständnisses des globalen Klimasystems wahrscheinlich, dass es diesen Zusammenhang gibt.
For Sirocco, El Niño is the most likely cause for drought striking the Akkadian Empire. But was there any on-the-ground archaeological evidence linking the drought to their collapse? Archaeologists look again to the soil layers at Tel Leilan. If there was drought, then surely there would be evidence. Here, they make a startling discovery.
Usually what you find in the soil at archaeological sites are the patterns of marks of activity of earthworms. What we find at Tel Leilan is that the soil is dead. There's no evidence of earthworm activity. The soil at Tel Leilan has become dust.
Unlike further south, where the land was watered by irrigation, the harbour plains were watered by rainfall. If the rain stopped, then it would cause the soil to die. Drought would make sense why there was such a large dust layer. It would also make sense why the archaeologists found discarded clay balls for pressing cuneiform tablets and unfinished buildings. Evidence that the inhabitants of Tel Leilan had left their home.
At its most basic, drought is a really devastating event because really you need it to do incredibly fundamental things. You need water to water your animals. You need water to water your crops. So if you don't have any water, how do you survive?
If the people of Tel Leilan were unable to feed themselves, and there was no longer water to drink, it would explain why the site was abandoned.
When the archaeologists radiocarbon dated the abandonment layer of the settlement, they got the date back 2200 BC. People only start coming back to the site around 1900 BC. So there's a 300-year gap where people don't live there.
The hiatus dates seem to fit perfectly with the Oman and Iran samples. The evidence points towards a 300-year drought, striking the Akkadian Empire right at the point they collapsed. And it's believed the north of the empire, which relied on rainfall to survive, was hit particularly hard. The taxes on grain grown on the harbour plains were crucial for supporting the Akkadian Empire, particularly funding their standing army. The city-states that resented being under Akkadian control took their chances and rose up against them.
When you can't feed your people, people start to think that perhaps you're not the right king. The Akkadian Empire maintained power through having a standing professional army. As soon as the taxes aren't coming in to pay your soldiers, what hope do you have of maintaining their loyalty? And therefore, what hope do you have of keeping control over this vast and varied empire that you reign over?
And it's thought the Akkadians weren't the only people hit by the drought. As the rain dries up, the Gutian tribes move in, chasing water down into Mesopotamia.
Over time, as the Akkadian Empire becomes more and more difficult to maintain, the Gutians become more and more of a threat, until eventually the whole thing is weakened from the inside and the Gutians come swarming out of the mountains and take over the Akkadian Empire.
But they rule an empire in name only. With the Akkadian Empire severely weakened, it soon broke up into city-states, like Mesopotamia had been just 140 years before. The world's first empire, the Akkadian Empire, was gone.